This episode is made possible by our generous patrons.
Welcome to the Inktofilm podcast, where we read the book
and then see the movie.
I'm Mayonnaise on Hamburgers.
And I'm Walking Through an Unexpected Spiderweb.
And this week we discuss the last half of Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett's 1990 novel, Good Omens. Walking unexpectedly through spiderwebs, is that what it was? Yeah, that'd be pretty awful.
I didn't know you didn't like mayonnaise on hamburgers.
I hate it. And I hate when fast food restaurants just do it automatically without even asking you. Not so much as asking you if that's what you want.
Is it just mayonnaise on hamburgers or mayonnaise in general?
I'm not a big fan of mayonnaise in general. It's okay on some things. But to me, hamburgers, ketchup and mustard, like what are you doing putting mayonnaise on there? What
about a nice fancy aioli?
Oh, aioli's a whole different conversation. That's fine. Oh man, those four Other Horsemen might have been the funniest part of the whole book to me. I absolutely was dying during that part.
So funny. I guess to explain it, if you haven't read the book and you're listening to this, those names that we said at the top of the episode, those are our horsemen names. So if we were two of the four horsemen of the apocalypse.
Or the other horsemen of the apocalypse that are just following the others down the road, which is what happened here. So in the book, there are four regular bikers who follow the four horsemen, and they name themselves. They like have this conversation where they're coming up with names for what additional horsemen of the apocalypse they are. And there's some amazing names. There's like one that's like cool people, because he's like just the cool people you see on television. I hate them. What was some of the other ones? Grievous bodily harm was one, and then there was things that don't work after you give them a good thumping. Yep. There were so many good ones because they also kept changing them. Oh, there was like embarrassing personal story or something like that. Yeah. Like I don't know, so many good ones.
It's just funny to think that let's add some additional horsemen and have them have these like ridiculous names. Like it's so
answering machines or whatever they call them in Britain, but like they're like the answering phones or something. I think was what it was, but it was answering machines as we know them. Was just like that was the horseman of the apocalypse name. It's just answering machines.
It's so good.
I thought about doing insurance companies, but that maybe it was too real.
Ooh, yeah. Insurance companies.
That was not very funny. It's just true.
My thing is like walking through an unexpected spider web. It's like you walk out of your house and you hit a spider web right in your face. Not a good day.
No, that's really good. I love that one. So we're back with the second half of Good Omens, if it isn't readily apparent. I'm having a lot of fun with this book, man. I mean, it was great. It was a good book. I really enjoyed it. I don't know about you. How did you like it?
I think it basically held its own for the comments that I made in the last episode. It really kept me entertained all the way through, and it was bringing some really funny, interesting angles to material that I feel like I'm steeped in to an extent, you know?
Right, yeah. It continued to draw a lot of comparisons to me to like other stuff I've seen that has come after. That was probably maybe inspired by this book, because apparently this is like a really landmark novel. And every time I mention it to someone, they're like, is this your first time reading it? Like incredulous. And I'm like, yeah. Like I didn't realize it was like admitting I'd never read Romeo and Juliet or something.
Nobody had really recommended it to me or anything. So for me, it was just coming into it completely no expectations, and it's so much fun. And I think I saw something about Neil Gaiman himself comparing it to Hitchhiker's Guide and saying like he wanted to try to write in the same vein as a Hitchhiker's Guide-esque story. And I felt that within the first page. I was like, oh my God, I felt the lifeblood of that kind of like British comedy.
Yeah. At the end, there's some, in my copy, there was some like interview style stuff with both Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. And then they had a section where it was like Neil Gaiman talking about Terry Pratchett and then Terry Pratchett talking about Neil Gaiman. Did yours have that part?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. There was a part where I think Neil Gaiman was saying that Terry Pratchett had always been compared to Douglas Adams, but that he didn't feel like that was a fair comparison, basically because Terry Pratchett was way more prolific than Douglas Adams, who I guess didn't write very many novels. I'm not like super steeped in it. But yeah, I mean, that Hitchhiker's Guide comparison, I mean, that's what, the critics were comparing it to, and using it as a blurb and saying, oh, this is just like Hitchhiker's Guide, but with the apocalypse and stuff like that, So I think you're right on with what the reaction was.
Yeah, on my copy, interestingly enough, there's a Clive Barker quote. Is there one on yours as well?
Yeah, there is on mine too, which is definitely funny. I think I posted something on Instagram about this. I was kind of surprised to see Clive Barker on this novel.
Yeah, I just thought it was an interesting overlap because we covered Rawhead Rex, which is a very different story. Clive Barker wrote Rawhead Rex, and it's very different to Good Omens here.
Yeah, I mean, night and day. That's like one of the more dark, twisted monster stories you'll find, in my opinion. And cool, get a big name out there. Giving you a blurb is always good. So before we get into it further, I just wanted to stop and tell you guys we have a giveaway that is still going if you're listening to this on either Thursday or Friday, the week it comes out. We will be announcing winners on Saturday morning, basically whenever I get up and do it. So you have until then to enter, and all you have to do is find the social media posts. I've been resharing it every so often on both Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Go on there, follow the instructions in the posts themselves, and you can enter to win a copy of Good Omens, which is the TV tie-in edition cover. And, if you've read this book already, you can enter. Like, it doesn't have to go to somebody who's never read it before. If you just want another version, or if you wanted to get it so that you can give it to somebody who would enjoy it, please feel free to enter. We'd love to just have more people entering into the contest, and then we'll see who wins. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a little jealous. I want to enter into the competition as well, because I have a copy of it, but I don't have this copy of it.
Yeah. Well, my wife was like, "Can I enter the competition?" I'm like, because I'm like, if you won, it'd probably look pretty bad. But yeah, I mean, people want this book, so and obviously we enjoyed it, so I definitely recommend it. And also I have launched a YouTube channel. You have to search for Inktofilm podcast on YouTube to find it, because we can't get an official URL quite yet until we get a certain number of subscribers. But if you want to check it out, we just posted our episodes on The Thing, which featured Mike Arnzen, who was our very first guest, award-winning horror author. And yeah, we had a lot of fun talking to him, and those episodes are definitely a fond memory of mine from, I guess, 2 years ago, about.
Yeah, something like that. It was great time having him on.
Yeah, so definitely check those out, especially if you're a fan of The Thing, that movie, the 82 John Carpenter, The Thing. Check those episodes out, and while you're there, definitely hit us with a subscribe so that we can eventually change and get like an official URL so that we don't have to have people searching for it. That'd be awesome.
And let us know what you think of our funny images we keep posting as the as the wallpaper.
Even if you've already heard the episode, we're trying to get creative with the background images, so we'd love to see a comment or something if you like them. All right, man. I think I'm ready to get into it. We're just going to go through. I have a really kind of awful summary that I'm going to use, but it's because it just blows by tons of stuff. So I think we're just going to use it to set us up, and then we can just try and fill in as much of the gaps as we can and just talk about things. We'll probably jump all over the place, but that's kind of how the book is too. It's a lot of jumping quickly between different groups, doing different things. So it'll be a little crazy, but I think that's a decent way to cover this.
Yep.
All right, so let me hit you with this first bit here. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse assemble: war, death, famine, and pollution. The prophecies of Agnes Nutter, 17th century witch, are rapidly coming to pass. Agnes Nutter was the only truly accurate prophet to ever have lived. She was burned at the stake by a mob, however, because she had foreseen her fiery end. She had packed 80 pounds of gunpowder and 40 pounds of roofing nails into her petticoats, and everyone who participated in the burning was killed instantly. Okay, so that's 2 big things here. Let's back up and talk about the 4 horsemen, because last we left them, I think we hadn't even really met pollution or death yet. And we meet them here soon as the messenger comes to actually get them to go to the meeting place. Pollution is this kind of like greasy-haired younger guy who was like polluting a river, I think, when the messenger comes upon him, right?
Yeah. I love the idea. I love this little messenger guy who keeps showing up to each of the horsemen too. Yeah, it's really just funny. Hilarious to me. One of my favorite things, honestly, of the entire book is you get people talking about the four horsemen, and then usually they'll talk about pestilence, or they'll talk about pollution. And I love that they were able to say there was a pestilence, but he got like older and retired, and then pollution took over. Yeah. And that's like kind of where the transition from pestilence to calling it pollution. I just thought that was so clever.
Yeah, and he retired with the invention of penicillin, because he was like, fucking penicillin is gonna make my job impossible. But then the new guy says something like, well, if he just stuck around, he would have seen all of the new possibilities in the modern era. Right. But I thought that was pretty funny that he was just defeated by penicillin essentially and decided to hang it up.
So good. The delivery person, like after meeting pollution, decides, or I guess walks back up to like his delivery vehicle or whatever, and he reads the next person he's supposed to deliver to. So far he's delivered to war, famine, and pollution, leaving only one horseman of the apocalypse. And he, on his clipboard, it says like the location of the next, delivery is everywhere. And so like you're thinking like, okay, so death is everywhere. Death is the fourth horseman.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to see if you felt the same way that I did, that him walking into the street was him, like, because he wrote a note to his wife, and I felt like that was him saying like goodbye, because in order to go meet death, to finish his delivery, he needed to walk in front of traffic and get hit in order to meet with death.
Interesting. So I remember what part you're talking about, and I guess I took that to be more that he assumed that in going to find death, he was going to die. But to me, it wasn't a deliberate act, because the way it was described was when he was going to find pollution, he almost got hit by a car. And then he was like, oh, those buggers are like going way too fast or whatever. And then he comes back to the same road, crosses it again. And then he goes, like, he's like, I almost hit by one again. And he's like, oh my God, that was really close. But then he like looks down and he's laying in the ditch. And the implication being that he actually did get hit. And then that's when death arrives. So to me, I thought that was like more accidental, but I do see what you're saying. Like, it seemed like he was maybe even if it was accidental or not, he knew that like death was a potential outcome from this delivery. And then,
yeah,
what is your take on death? This sort of skeletal figure who speaks in all caps in the book and has a certain sound to his voice on the audiobook. And yeah, what did you think of him?
I thought it was great. I really liked death. I also liked that he was like basically unemotional the entire time. I guess his one emotion would be like he was determined, or he was like very serious. But I thought it was really effective. He was scary for sure.
What immediately follows is we see the four horsemen gathering at a Hell's Angels bar, which I thought was a nice touch. And this is where we meet the other four bikers who get talked about later. And as each of the horsemen are coming in, there's some mystery person playing trivia. And every time the new horseman comes in, there's like a new category added to the trivia game that none of the other bikers have ever seen before.
Was this a video game?
Yeah, it's like a trivia, like one of those.
Okay.
You see them at truck stops. It's like an arcade trivia game that you sometimes see. I don't know if you can play with multiple computers, and there's also like modern versus what was available in 1990 or 89, whenever they're writing this. I don't know.
One of them is wearing like a black helmet and playing that arcade game.
Right. And so then once all the other three have gathered together at a table, it's revealed that Death is the one who's been playing trivia, because he's been here all along.
My favorite touch with the trivia game was that, it was like normal categories like sports and geography, things like that. And then as each of the horsemen arrived, one of the categories would be popped off, and the new category would be whatever horseman just arrived. So like war would be a new category, and then they'd ask a question about war, and then all the bikers wouldn't know it, but Death would, and he would like answer the question. And then, like pollution would show up, and pollution would be a category on the game next, and it would have knocked off another category. I thought that was super funny. Yeah,
and famine being there also created a situation where like all the food was gone or had spoiled or something, and so everybody was hungry, and then the bikers come up to confront them because they don't recognize them as being actual Hell's Angels. And then they're like, we're the real Hell's Angels, essentially. The leader kind of thinks it's cool. And I guess because of that, they end up following them when they leave. And they're all riding on motorcycles, we should say, instead of horsemen. They're on these motorbikes. And they set off to go to Tadfield as the four horsemen, and with the four other horsemen trailing behind. So let's pop over to the Agnes Nutter stuff. This was told, I think, to Newt by Anathema, who have now met. I don't remember if they had met last time we talked about them. But he crashes his car, which is this Wasabi. it's this really just clunker of a car, and he crashes that, and then I think Adam actually finds him, and Adam and them rescue him, bring him to Anathema. They talk to each other, and she seems to already kind of know what's going to happen with their interaction because she's read the prophecies. And then she fills him in on who Agnes Nutter was. And we find out more about her, that she was burned at the stake, and that during the process of her being burned at the stake, she knew it was going to happen. So she loaded up her like petticoats with dynamite, which I talked about in the summary, and blows everybody up, which I thought was pretty clever. So, and I don't know if we should talk about it here or not, but Newt is definitely attracted to Anathema. And then she seems to be like kind of going with it to him, and he's kind of weirded out, like, whoa, I can't believe she's kind of giving me the time of day. And we get the implication that maybe it's because she knows that they're supposed to get together, and then they do end up getting together and sleeping together. It's kind of interesting because like the world's ending outside, and like there's like huge storms going on and stuff, and then they're just like, well, now we're just gonna have sex. I don't know, what did you think of that part?
The way that it was, that chapter ended, I thought that they were dead for a second. I had to like reread it because it seemed like the roof was collapsing or something, and they like hugged each other, and then the next time we see them, they're like laying in bed.
Yeah,
and you're like, oh, okay, so they didn't get collapsed on or something.
They were like protecting each other from the house shaking, and they were scared, and then it like faded to black with like the implication being of intimacy coming.
So I wanted to talk about something with Agnes Nutter and the way that these prophecies work. That's kind of described to Percival in this situation. Is and I love this because there are people who will say that you can read the Bible certain ways and it's predicted like every major event. Have you ever heard anything like this? Like you'll hear people talk about like scriptures and things like that, and they'll say like, oh, if you look at this, it's kind of just taking an event that happened and then kind of like bending it and saying like this was predicting 9/11 or whatever.
Yeah, no, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
And that's kind of how they used this prophecy book. She explained to Percival that like you can't look at it and predict the future. It's only after an event has happened that you can say like, oh, she did predict it correctly, because she's like really bad at predicting things. Agnes Nutter was, because the way that she describes everything, she's from a different age, so she's describing planes as weird contraptions and cars as like weird chariots and things like that. So,
well, it was also funny in like the misinterpretations that happened from her family over time. Like it was always interesting to see how they would misread stuff and misattribute it to different things. My
favorite one was they read something and they were like, it's from like very far back, like 1600 or something. It's like, it seems that Agnes had a little bit too much to drink this day, and then like 150 years later, another ancestor was like, yes, I agree. I guess even Agnes was not above the sins of man. I just thought that was funny that they were like leaving little comments every couple hundred years on like the prophecies.
It's like annotated, and I wish there was a part I wish we had gotten, because after Anathema and Newt sleep together, she mentions how the prophecy was in the book, and that in fact it had encouraging notes written in the margins from her like ancestors who were like realized that that's what it was predicting. I wish we had actually gotten those, because I thought that those might have been really funny to see.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just gonna get into it because I know that it's left out of the next part of the summary. We get the aliens come down, and like this is a very Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy scene. It's when Newt is on his way. So yeah, it's actually before he even meets up with Anathema. He's on his way there, and a UFO lands next to him in the road. These aliens get out. It's like a toad-like creature and a little robot, and they come up to him and talk to him, and their conversation is just amazingly good and so funny.
With a book like Hitchhiker's Guide or this, like, what's the most ridiculous, outlandish, like unpredictable thing that could happen right now? And he's just driving down the road, and then like in this Angels and Demons book, they introduce aliens, and aliens come down and they say a bunch of stuff about how we're like totally screwing up the world, and it
was like they were police, like cosmic police, who have shown up to almost to like give the Earth a citation or something for like exceeding CO2 levels. And there's one thing I wrote here. It says this is actually at the end of their conversation. The alien turns back around and says, "You do know you could find yourselves charged with being a dominant species while under the influence of impulse-driven consumerism, don't you?" It's just like, what? I love the way he kept calling him sir. Was really funny. I don't know. I wish I had written down, honestly, more of the quotes from that conversation, because they were all so good. But yeah, it's basically like talking about how the world is going to shit, and like clearly they're at fault for it, and they're not acting so they're like, they could be in trouble, and he's like warning them, like they knew that they could be in trouble for this.
And I love that he's like, what if he's like, oh yeah, I'll get right on that. I'll tell somebody. And then he thinks to himself, like, who the fuck am I supposed to tell this information to that'll believe me and that will be able to like help the situation so that the aliens don't give us a citation.
So the world's just like going mad right now, by the way. There's like a Leviathan coming up. There's Atlantis has risen. There's all kinds of just wild stuff going on all over the world, and this crazy weather. And
which was all Adam basically saying things that he wanted, and like, you know, the rainforests were coming back and pushing through cities and things like that, sprouting out of the ground. There's
just like funny stuff here in my notes that I just wanted to mention so that I could talk about them with you, but it's kind of just like mentioning funny bits, but whatever. There was one part that I really liked where Newt says that he doesn't have a face for haircuts, and I identified with that so strongly. That was really funny. Like, he's talking about how like other people can get haircuts and it'll change how they look, and they'll look like, cool and different, and for him, he's like, it's basically just shorter hair on my face, and it doesn't change anything.
When he said the thing about how, like, you know, over the years, he would bring in like photos and try to give it to the barber. I was like, yeah, I've done that, and it just never comes out. It never comes out how you want it to look.
Yeah, and he's like, that was my mistake, because me and the barber both knew no matter what they did, I wasn't gonna look like that photo.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Very, very true. Oh, I love, and I'm just going to call this one out, but this happens throughout the book. Whenever Adam and his friends are talking and they missay a word, it's always really funny to me. One of them was talking about like going to Tibet to learn marital law when they meant martial law, which it's like such a little kid thing to do, and it's so funny. And there's just a lot of these moments throughout their conversations.
The other thing that I think happens here is you were right about the Leviathan, because there's like a scene from a ship. And they're going along trying to find whales and capture whales, and there's none left because basically Adam had said like he didn't want any more whales to, right? Wasn't that what it was? Like he didn't want any whales to be hurt.
I think he didn't want them to get killed, so maybe he got rid of them, or maybe just made them so they couldn't be found. I don't know. It was kind of unclear.
So they couldn't find any whales, and they were like frustrated about it. And then the depths started getting like ridiculously deep, like deeper than anything that's ever been on Earth before. And then they're like, wow, it's like the craziest, it's the deepest I've ever seen it. And he's like, that's not possible. No place on Earth is like that. And then the depth, they're like, oh no, sorry, it must have been malfunction because the depth is rising. And then we get like from the perspective of this Kraken, it's like it didn't have any eyes because there was no reason for it to see, and it slowly comes up, and it well, actually not slowly, it quickly comes up, and the depth is just getting shallower and shallower and shallower under the boat, and then eventually it just, I don't think we get like anything other than the fact that it says like it, and then it attacked the ship.
Yeah, the ship was like a tiny metal, like something over its head or something. Like it's supposed to be like, it's supposed to be this giant ship, right? And it's just tiny compared to it. It was cool. Yeah, I mean that's all that we really get from the Leviathan. And then I think we hear like on the news talk of it attacking some ships or something. That's just part of this whole tapestry of the world just going to shit. I do want to check in on Aziraphale and Crowley because I know that once again the next part of summary blows right past this. But both of those two characters have some interesting bits going on. Aziraphale decides he's going to talk to like heaven and report to them what's going on, because he's like, I better do it so that we can try and win this thing, because apparently it's going to happen. And so he sets up like a summoning circle or something to talk to them, and then he also lights some incense just because it smells nice, which I thought was a funny addition.
Yeah, it was really funny.
And then he talks to the Metatron, which is the voice of God, but it's said to be the voice of God in the way that like a spokesman for the president is the voice of the president. He's not really the voice of God; he's just a spokesman for God.
Right.
And so he talks to him for a little bit, and gets interrupted. I think he gets interrupted as Shadwell arrives.
It's actually like he finishes his conversation, I think. Aziraphale was trying to say like, it doesn't have to go through this way. We can stop it. We know where the child is. We know what he's doing. We can stop the war. And Metatron was like, why would we want to do that? It's time for the good to triumph over the evil, and the war has to go on.
Yeah. The point isn't to avert the war. It's to win the war. Yeah.
And then they're like, but you're going to get a commendation, and you've done a great job. And so come back immediately. And he's like, well, I have some other things to tie up, and so I'll be there eventually. And Metatron's like, all right, whatever, show up eventually. And then Shadwell walks in at the end of the conversation.
And Shadwell's realized that he might have some info, I think, and that he might have some money I think he might be able to. I think he was going there to like rob him or something, right? Because he's like he was thinking of like 2 different people he knew who he could potentially get money from, and one of them he didn't want to mess with, and the other one he thought he maybe could. And I think it's him.
I think I don't know if he's trying to rob him or just get money from him.
Get money from him somehow,
like some way.
But when he shows up, he overhears him like the end of this conversation. So he's convinced that Aziraphale is a witch, and he tries to like cast him out. And he comes at him, and then Aziraphale doesn't want him to step into the circle because he's like, oh, that's very bad for humans. Don't step into the circle. And then I guess Aziraphale accidentally steps into the circle and says, oh, fuck, or something. It's like the second time he's cursed in 6,000 years. And then we see Aziraphale just gets like zapped away. And then Shadwell thinks he has this power in his hand, and he thinks he has this like witch killing hand or demon killing hand. You want to fill us in on what happens with Crowley around the same time? Oh, yeah, because Aziraphale tries to call Crowley. I forgot. That links those 2 scenes. He tries to call him, and then when he's talking to him, that's when Shadwell comes in, and he has to stop talking to him.
It's like right around the same time, so that we know kind of what's going on for the 2 characters. And it's funny because Aziraphale's like trying to fill him in on stuff, and he's just like not able to talk at all. He just says like, "All right, yeah, sure," and like they hang up really quickly.
Because it sounds like something's going on his end, but we don't know what it is, and then later we find out.
So Crowley, he goes back to his apartment, and then he gets a call, or like I think over the TV, the demons come over the TV and say like, we know that you have been hiding the real child, and that this warlock kid isn't the real Antichrist. Mm-hmm. So they're like, we're coming to get you, and he's like, no, don't do that. And they come after him.
It's Ligger and what's the other one's name?
Haster,
yeah, come, and they arrive in this like fake car, like it's like a car-like thing. Arriving
that would convince like humans if they saw it, but not like it's very clearly like floating off the ground and everything.
And then we see him get into his remember he has like the sketch of the Mona Lisa on the wall, and there's like a wall safe, and he opens it up, and inside he has to get these gloves and pick up like a barrel, or not a barrel, some sort of container, flask. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's really funny. And I figured out what it was like immediately when he was like handling it with care.
I actually kind of thought it was going to be something else and not that, because I was hoping, because I don't know. Once again, so many other things have done this since then, but maybe that was more fresh at the time. But I was kind of hoping it was something more extreme than just holy water.
Yeah, it was a holy hand grenade.
I thought it was going to be like the blood of Christ or something that he had stolen in the 14th century or something. You know, I thought it was going to be something like super holy, but it's just holy water.
Right.
But yeah,
but he can't. He's handling it with gloves and everything because he can't touch it either because he's a demon. And so basically, it's really funny because he sets it up like a prank. He puts it in like a bucket and puts the bucket on the top of the door so that when they walk through the door, the bucket will tip over on top of the demons who are coming to get him. Yeah. And it kills one of them like violently. Like they shrivel up and go inside themselves and just melt basically. Mm-hmm. And then the other one doesn't get affected at all because it didn't get splashed. And then he was like, "Oh shit! All right, time for Plan B."
Yeah, and he has like a spray bottle that he's threatening with, which by the way, he has a spray bottle because he has plants, and he has plants that he like terrifies by yelling at them all the time or something, and apparently they grow really well because he scares them all into growing well.
It's pretty fucked up because every once in a while he'll go around and he finds one of the plants that's like doing really well or isn't doing well, and he takes it out and he takes it around and says like, you see what this guy's doing? He's gonna die for no reason basically. And then he takes it away and like throws the plant away and brings the pot back and puts the pot somewhere where the other plants can see it.
Yeah.
And the book says they're the most beautiful plants in wherever he is, London or somewhere like that, but they're also the most terrified.
Yeah, and this is endearing to me. Like this is the kind of stuff that makes me like Crowley, because this is like very low stakes sorts of evil that we see him partaking in.
Yeah, so he's threatening with the spray bottle, which supposedly has holy water in it as well, and Hester realizes there's a drop coming from the bottle that's like slowly making its way towards Crowley's hand. And then it rolls over Crowley's hand and he's not affected by it. So he knows that he's bullshitting and he's like basically faking the fact that there's holy water in there. And then really weirdly, he like picks up the phone and talks to, that's when Aziraphale calls, and he talks to him for a second and he's like, hey, yeah. He's like thinking about something else. And then they hang up and then he picks it back up and then he like jumps into the phone line.
Yeah. So he convinces Haster that he's going to call the like the High Council or something. He doesn't really convince him, but he lies and says this thing just enough to where he can grab the phone. And then he leaps into like the electricity itself.
He said that demons choose the form that they are, so they can be incorporeal. Like they can become, basically electrons. Like matter or something, electrons, and travel through the lines. But it's funny because Hester jumps in right after him, and it's said that he's like 2 inches away from him in the telephone wire, but he can't catch up to him. But as soon as he pops out of the phone on the other end, Hester is going to be 2 feet behind him, so it's not going to be that big of a difference once they finally pop out. So he has to kind of like juke him and like act like he's going to get off and change directions and then shoot off. And when he does, what he does is he's listening for how many rings go through on one of the lines, and on the last possible ring, he shoots out, and then the phone stops ringing, right?
Yeah, because it's the answering machine. He gets past the answering machine, and then when Hester arrives, he gets trapped in the answering machine, and that's like the prison that he's stuck in for a time at least. So yeah, that's what's been going on with those two. As the world descends into chaos, Adam attempts to split up the world between his gang, and after realizing that by embracing absolute power, he will not be able to continue to grow up as a child in Lower Tadfield, Adam decides to try and stop the apocalypse. So there's a whole thing where Adam sort of has this moment of like being sort of power obsessed. And he starts talking about how he's going to fix everything. He's going to set the world right. He's going to wipe it clean and start over. He's going to give each one of his friends like a whole part of the world. He's going to give one of them all of Africa, another one like all of Russia, and one all of America. And then they start like talking amongst themselves about like, it's not fair. They get this. I want this part. And they start divvying up. But they're also kind of like scared by it. But then they're like, well, we're going to take it seriously. Because they also can't tell if this is a game or not at this point.
After the territory is like divvied up, I think that he goes a little further, and he's saying like they're like asking him what he wants and what's going to happen and all that kind of stuff. And he starts saying, that's when he starts saying like, I'll change everything. I'll do everything I want.
Yeah, and you won't ever have to go to bed because your parents won't be there to make you. And it sounds like he's going to get rid of all the people, which was not what they want, or make them fight, or create people to serve them and all this stuff. Yeah.
So the them get scared by this, and they like attempt to run. They're about to run away, and he uses his powers, and he's like, halt, stop there. Yeah. And they're frozen in their tracks. So like we're seeing his power. He's like able to control living, breathing, thinking people. And they get stopped in their tracks. And I think this is part of what like this, in addition to the fact that he's not going to be able to live out his days as a normal kid, are kind of what turned him around.
Yeah. So he's also kind of getting whispered to by like a voice in his head. And it's unclear whether or not it's Satan himself or it's just like the part of himself that wants to do all this stuff. But yeah, he's able to overcome it, and he sort of casts it out with this like scream that gets echoes throughout all the universe. And then after he casts it out, that's when he decides like, okay, we're gonna go to this thing, and we're gonna, he knows that the Horsemen are coming because he knows some of this stuff, like I guess from the voice. And instead of seeing to the apocalypse, like, he wants to avert it now. All right, so next up, Anathema, Newton, Sergeant Shadwell, Madame Tracy, and Adam and his gang, Aziraphale and Crowley, all gather at the military base near Lower Tadfield to stop the Horsemen from causing a nuclear war and ending the world. Okay, so again, even with all the stuff we've talked about, we just jumped over a lot because we got to talk about what happens to Aziraphale, right? Like he when he gets zapped in this transportation, whatever it is, circle, he starts popping around into different people around the world. It seems like they're psychics or like mystics of some kind. And he inhabits their body for a moment and like has a conversation with them. And then he finds out each time that he's not where he needs to be, which is in England. At first he goes to someone named Two Bones, I think, in Africa.
Yeah, Johnny Two Bones.
And then the one that I thought was really funny was he goes into this American evangelist or televangelist, yeah, who is he's in the middle of recording like one of his specials. I think the song they're talking about is like, Jesus is the switchboard operator of my life or something. Right. And then they start talking about all the other songs that are on this collection of these like Christian songs that have made them popular. And the one that I absolutely loved was Jesus is the sticker on the bumper of my soul.
So funny. It's so good. Well, all of this is gold. All of the televangelist stuff is so funny to me because like there's so much corruption that can go on with these televangelists, and like they're really touching on it here.
And it's funny too because he even says like, though he's a true believer, it's still like he's given up like having people come in for real miracles because that was too tricky.
They're having to pay actors. And so now he doesn't have to pay actors anymore. He's just calling out and saying like, so-and-so called in and this is how I help them and they're better now.
And then the number is like 1-800 give me cash or something. Like it's like the number is like so obviously that he's giving out for this. And Another really good one I wrote down. This one's also interesting. So it's when I'm swept up by the rapture, take the wheel of my pickup. And that just it made me think of Jesus Take the Wheel, right? That's like a real song that came out much later. It's like, did he predict it?
I think so, but they even said that it was like a lot of the songs were kind of like rip-offs on like similar country music songs.
Right. I guess that's true. Maybe the Jesus Take the Wheel is like a remake of an older song. I don't know.
Oh, I don't know about that. It's just funny to think that like it kind of lines up that like that kind of thing could happen.
Jesus is the sticker on the bumper of my soul is a brilliant name for a song. I love it.
Oh my god, the Take the Wheel of my pickup really got me.
So after that, he leaves because he realizes that guy's in America, and he's like, I gotta go. And so he ends up popping into Madame Tracy's body. And it's like during a seance that she's having, like she has these like, I guess, fake seances where she communes with the other side and talks about other people's lost loved ones. And then he actually comes in and starts talking to everybody. And then another really funny thing happens where one of the people demands to speak to her son, who who'd been paying to talk to. And he's like, oh, actually, the guy is here. I'll let him on. And he lets him come on and talk. And he basically tells her to shut up, which is something he never told her in real life. And then she's all offended. And then he comes back on. He's like, well, wasn't that touching or something? It's just really funny.
It was like something about how she was like, there's like a line that she would always say to him to get him to shut up, and she could like control him, and it was like, oh, your heart condition, and he's like, she says it to him, she's like, oh, don't get too riled up your heart, and he's like, I don't have a heart anymore. So
yeah, good stuff. So anyway, then he starts actually having a conversation with Tracy about what's happening, because she's like, she kind of understands some of this stuff, or believes it, I guess. And then Shadwell walks in, thinks that she's being possessed by a demon, and they have this whole thing where Aziraphale ends up telling them what's actually going on, and they set off for the base together, which is what the summary has already gotten to. Crowley goes to the bookstore to find Aziraphale. It ends up being on fire when he arrives, and he has to walk in through the flames. He rescues the prophecies, uses that to determine he needs to go to the military base. He heads off for the military base himself, and now like all the characters are heading to the military base, and we got to talk about that because that's also really interesting. Crowley's basically driving his car at like 150 miles an hour, and it's on fire.
It's just like melting more and more, and like it's like the longer he drives it, and he loves that car. Like that's his favorite possession, the only thing he cares about.
And then he's holding it together just to like sheer willpower. And then Aziraphale is on like a flying scooter with Madame Tracy, and they like take off, and then and it basically compares it to like the Star Trek Enterprise zipping off, and he's like flying through the air at some crazy speed with Shadwell on the back, and they're wearing like a pink helmet and a green helmet.
Aziraphale is within Madame Tracy's body. He's like inhabiting her body, so it's like this split personality thing going on, and Shadwell's like freaking out about how it's the split personality, and he realizes that Aziraphale got through the portal and it took over Madame Tracy.
Yeah.
I do want to shoot back really quick, because one thing that we forgot to talk about was with the televangelist. The funniest part about all that is that Aziraphale jumps into his body during a live broadcast and says a bunch of contradictory stuff to what he's been saying. Like he basically says like, this is Aziraphale's an angel, and he's basically saying like, this is a bunch of propaganda bullshit, and like goes on and on about it, and talks about how like this is incorrect, and this is how this goes, and then he like looks around and realizes that he's on there's like cameras and everything, and he's like, oh shit, am I on live TV?
I hope we get this scene in the TV series.
I think we will. Yeah, I honestly don't know how much we'll get pulled. I think we're going to see a pretty faithful adaptation.
We'll talk about it at the end. I think that's a good way to end this, because neither of us have seen any of the show yet. Obviously, I've seen a trailer. Did you end up watching a trailer yet?
Yeah, I watched a trailer now after I finished the book.
So we can talk about maybe some of the stuff we saw in the trailer. We can do that at the end.
So yeah, Aziraphale is with Madame Tracy and Shadwell, and they're on like the scooter that's like covered in like a nimbus cloud or something, right?
Yeah.
Like flying along at like
it's
40
like a blue
miles an hour.
nimbus, and then we get the red of the fiery cars.
The onomatopoeia that they have here is the sound of a scooter. We keep reading is like putt 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 putt.
It's making that sound even though it's flying. Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah.
And then the horsemen are also going along the road, and they got this is where I think we actually get the conversation about what horsemen of the apocalypse would you be. And then they all arrive at this blockade that's in front of this like some sort of barrier as well. That's this. I think it's supposed to be like really, really hot and really, really cold at the same time. They're trying to do readings on it. They can't figure it out. The flaming car goes through, it just catches more on fire. The scooter goes past, no problem. And then the four horsemen come and they like elevate and go over the cops too. But then the ones that are following them, I guess, just crash into them. And I guess they all die except for one of them. And he's like, I realized why I wasn't in Revelations, because apparently I don't make it. And then he says something really funny too. I just remembered. He says, they say, "Who are you?" And he says, I'm a man covered in fish," or something, like laying on a pile of fish or something, because all the fish have been raining from the sky. So he changes his name one last time.
I just thought of another one that I love was standing in dog shit, I think. Was one of the I love that one too.
Okay, so the next bit is this guy named R.P. Tyler, and he is this busybody neighborhood. He's like on the committee, and he's like a neighborhood watch guy. And apparently, whatever he does, whenever anything goes wrong in his community, he writes to the local paper like an op-ed about it, and he has these really passive aggressive ways about getting on everybody else's shit. And this guy, who I have a feeling that this is the kind of guy that like everybody knows if you're in that part of England. Like there's one of these in every town, I imagine. That's the feeling I'm getting. And anyway, he encounters like every single group of characters who all stop and ask him for directions. And each one of the interactions is like really funny in its own right. He's like intimidated by the four horsemen, and then he gives them the directions, and then
but it's like really long and extensive, and like absolutely there's no way you could follow it. And then they're all like, I don't think I got that, and Death is like, I got it, let's go. He understood it.
Yeah. And then afterwards, I think it's Adam and the them show up, who he yells at them like, "Hey, you should be going home. You got to go to bed. You're out too late." And they're like, "Oh, no, we're not, whatever." And they leave. And then he's like, "I'm going to tell your parents." And then the scooter flies up with Madame Tracy and starts speaking with Aziraphale's voice, and he thinks like, "Oh, this is a ventriloquist." And the person on the back is clearly a dummy. I don't know why he thought it was a real person. He starts every time after he talks to them, he's like composing a letter in his head of like what he's going to write in about this new nuisance he's seen. And then after that, Crowley comes up in his flaming car. And it's really funny because he's like, he wants to tell him that his car's on fire, but he's like, well, clearly it's really obvious, so I shouldn't tell him. And then he gives him the directions, and Crowley drives off, and then he's like, these young people driving in their flaming cars.
The letter he's composing for the flaming car is he's trying to find the words to put down to write to the newspaper, and he's just like, the car was on fire. The car was, and he just can't figure out what he wants to say.
Yeah, he's like, this is ridiculous. I don't know how I could possibly say this. So anyway, there's this whole thing where the four horsemen of the apocalypse have to like talk their way past a security guard. They get inside and they start setting into motion the apocalypse, and like pollution actually gets into the system, the computer system, and he creates propagates a virus that's going to go out into like all the world's computers. War is like helping to turn everybody against each other, and so like the world is on the precipice of nuclear Armageddon, and that's going to be the thing that like kicks this all off.
I liked how War talked about the apocalypse and what they were expecting going into the apocalypse, and all the time that they waited, and all it was really was for the four of them to jump on motorcycles and meet up at this base. And there's not as much like slashing people apart with her sword and killing that she wanted. It's more like nuance than that, like they're going to start a war and
a lot more talking. Yeah, she wanted action. So while this is all going on, Adam and them have arrived, and the four horsemen all start to like sort of revert to, I guess, their more natural states and change and becoming a little bit less human when they encounter Adam and the them. And Adam tells them, because they're like, "Oh, you're here now, we can finally have this thing can kick off." And he's like, "Well, I don't want it to. In fact, I don't think we're going to have the apocalypse at all. And instead, we're not going to do that. I want you to undo everything you've done." And so then they are like, "Well, that's not what's going to happen." And so they sort of challenge them. And then each of the them has an item that they've built, and it's out of like pieces of wood and string. And it's like a crown and a sword and a scales, which I think we've talked about, that each of the horsemen got an item like that, and they use these items to capture the four horsemen. like throw at him, or like they strike swords together, and each time it happens, it captures the horseman into the item, and defeats all of them except for Death, which, by the way, I should also say there's a cool part earlier where War is thinking about how, even though they're the four horsemen, like they're not really equal with Death. He's kind of this other sort of figure who has different powers and isn't really equal to them.
He no matter what is always there, no matter what time period it is, and like war can go away, pollution can go away, famine can go away at certain points, but Death is always constant.
Well, and she said it was like he's like a tax collector or something. I was like he's ever present, which I thought was funny, you know. And so they defeat all of them, but then Death unfurls his wings and he reveals that I guess his name's Azrael, the angel of death. And I wrote down the line here because I thought it was really good. And this, I would bet a lot of money. I don't know how much, but I would bet a lot of money that this was written by Neil Gaiman, because this is such a Neil Gaiman description. And I know he did a lot of I know that he was credited with doing a lot of the stuff with the demons and like the devils and the maggots and stuff that gets talked about when Hazard, which we haven't even touched on, but Hazard does get free and he like shows up in this telecom area and like kills a bunch of like telemarketers, I guess, and he shows up and there's like a giant pile of maggots who all have tiny mouths and like all this stuff. Yeah, right.
Yeah, like so this woman makes a call, and then she's about to hang up, and then like tiny maggots start pouring out.
It's because she calls the answering machine, and so it frees him. That's right. What it is.
And so these maggots are pouring out, and more like completely fill up the room and devour these people, and then all form together to create Hester. And then like they just leave like skeletons behind, which I mean that was a pretty gruesome scene, and like you know, pretty cool to see that like the demons were that like. And
apparently that's Neil Gaiman, because even Terry Pratchett said that like the maggots are all him.
Yeah, so like comparing Hester to somebody like Crowley, you can see like the maybe more lighthearted demons versus this like really ruthless, disgusting.
So the description of Azrael here: wings of night, wings that were shapes cut through the matter of creation into the darkness underneath, in which a few distant lights glimmered, lights that may have been stars, but may have been something entirely else. Just after reading Ocean at the End of the Lane. Like that feels very Gaiman to me. We get a little bit of that in Coraline too, which we did cover, but it's very poetic, it's very beautiful, and it's also dark. And I feel like that to me, when I think of Gaiman, I think of that meeting of a beautiful poetic prose with meaning like sort of like a goth like sort of emo vibe, but in a good way. I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean in a good way. It's just very like emotional and sort of like morose in a way, but also beautiful. So that to me feels very Gaiman. Anyway, so Death unfurls these wings and then basically says like, all right, fine, if you don't want to do it, we won't do it, but will always be there, and I'll be there waiting for the next time. And then he flies away.
So when you were talking about the wings, it reminded me of another line, and I could look it up here in a second, but it's basically he's describing a color that you can only see at the instant of death.
Oh,
it's like the black. It's like the black. Do you remember what it was called?
It's like black ultra something? Black or something. Something like that. Yeah.
And it's like this color that like it's like the instant that you die, you see like these brilliant.
Yeah. It's like oh yeah, you could see it right now if you want. All you have to do is take a full run headfirst into a brick wall, and then the instant before you die, like you'll see the color or whatever.
Right. And I thought that was an amazing description as well. Like that's just like what I think that was again probably more like a Gaiman.
I don't know, man. That's funny enough, though, to where that could be Pratchett. It's hard to say. And then I actually really liked at the end, there was a really good exchange. They didn't say the line. They said that both of them complimented the other on writing this brilliant line. But both of them were like, I didn't write that line. So then that was funny too. It was like they lost track of who even wrote it. Although it is said that like Pratchett wrote the majority of it as far as like actually drafting it. It seems like he wrote the most of it. But it was like a lot of phone conversations where they would talk about what would happen with each other.
I heard something about maybe like 70% of like the work was put in by Pratchett or something like that, which brings me to something I wanted to mention because we talked about it a little bit.
They both definitely revised it. So Gaiman comes in and he's revising Pratchett's prose. After he revises that line and changes some of it, what is that line written by Pratchett or written by Gaiman? And I think that's why they say like it's impossible to say who wrote what.
Yeah, and I think that it's not really worth trying to like piece it together. Like the 70%.
Although we've
like,
done it.
Yeah, we've done it multiple times. But honestly, it's like it was written by both of them. Is it really worth digging into like who wrote what? And it's definitely a creation by both of them. Had their eyes on every single word and decided if it should stay or not. Yeah. So it's clearly written by both of them. And that's leading me to what I wanted to say, because we felt in the first episode we maybe didn't talk enough about Terry Pratchett, and we talked a lot about Gaiman in this coverage. Yeah. But Pratchett is completely integral to the story in every way, and we want to give him the utmost credit. And absolutely, he had a hand in a masterful hand in like creating the story and making it what it was,
and making it as funny as it is. I've never read another Gaiman novel that's this funny, so I think that's clearly his influence.
And that's I think that's fun to think about, because even if Neil Gaiman wrote this story on his own, you don't get this book.
No,
it's so much different, and it's so unique that I think that you can't be stressed enough that Terry Pratchett had as much of a role as Neil Gaiman.
So the apocalypse is, I'm not even going to use the summary at this point because I feel like I got it now. So the apocalypse has not actually finished yet. They're both kind of like thinking like, oh, maybe we've beaten them now, but then Crowley's like, it's not over yet. And then sure enough, the Metatron and Beelzebub rises, and we get these two more characters. Now, Beelzebub, who at first I was like, wait, is Beelzebub the same thing as Satan, or is that something different? Apparently he's a prince of hell, at least in this book, and not Satan himself.
I think sometimes he is Satan, but it's like, I think it's kind of just like God, Jesus type thing, where it's like they're one and the same within the religion, like God is Jesus, is the Holy Spirit, that kind of thing. Maybe like Beelzebub is like part of Satan, but they're very clearly like the right hit, like they're the next person in line to
me it seems like he's supposed to be set up as like the same kind of thing as Metatron is.
Yes.
First mate.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so they're both there, and they're both talking about how like this thing's still happening. What are you talking about? And then Adam comes forward and says, no, it's not. Basically says, I want to just live my normal life. I want to experience life. It's not fair for you to judge all these people when you gave them freedom of choice anyway. And this is the kind of stuff that's going to happen. And he has like a cool moment of like, to me, this is very like humanism forward. And I love that, because that's the way I feel too. And he says like, what if we just live a little bit longer, and we have a chance to live long enough to see why it matters that climate change is a problem, and like all this stuff, right? Instead of focusing so much on the afterlife and what comes after. And I totally agree with that. And I love that bit.
And I think that's kind of getting at like a lot of the moral of this story is really built into that. It's just like, it's about being human and what being human means. And we don't need to be so fascinated with like what is beyond us, or I think it's kind of just like stopping to appreciate what we have. And maybe not getting so caught up to the point that we're willing to fight wars over the fact that people disagree with what we think happens after, when it's like clearly what's happening right now is just as important.
And I think Crowley even points this out, and he says, so we were going to raise him to try and compete. Either we were going to raise him as an evil being, or we were going to raise him as an angelic being of a being of heaven. And instead, because they raised the wrong child, what instead happened was he was raised as a human. And so this is his human forward. And so all of his Antichrist powers get put behind this idea of humanism and wanting to just let things play out. And I think that's cool. That's like a cool message and a fun twist on what we would think from an Antichrist type character, right? That he is actually the like power of humanity at this point. And so he tells them it's not going to happen, and they have to just admit, because like he's so powerful that apparently it's like if he's not on board, it's not going to happen.
Well, and they also are all like Death and these guys. Everybody's making it seem like it's not the end, and like for now the battle is over, but like eventually it'll come back around, and like I feel like Adam is kind of just being like, well, when it does, I'll be here to stop it again.
So the Metatron leaves, Beelzebub leaves, and disappointed that it's not going to happen. And then the ground starts to shake, and Crowley's like, the adversary is coming. Like, this is really going to happen. And then Adam, he does some sort of, like, motion. And
well, hold because I actually like the build up to this moment.
Okay.
A lot of the characters have decided to leave. A lot of the characters are, like, on their way out, and this, like, volcanic eruption starts happening, and, like, this earthquake. And basically Crowley is like, no, this isn't over. We gotta actually, like, it's gonna go down. We have to fight. And so Aziraphale picks up the sword, war sword, and he like ignites it, and it's like a flaming sword that he hasn't wielded in forever. And they're standing back to back, basically saying like, there's no way that we can possibly beat this guy, but like we have to fight right now. And then that's kind of when a couple other characters turn and like come back, and they're all gonna. I think Shadwell comes back, and he's gonna fight with them. He's got like his crazy gun that can shoot anything, and so they're all standing down this like eternal baddie, and then Adam comes up as like the eruption's happening, and everybody knows that it's Satan. Like it's like known that the Satan is coming out.
So Satan seems like he's gonna rise from the ground. It's shaking and everything's, all this stuff's happening, but then Adam does some sort of like waves his hand, stops it from happening. But right then his actual father, Mr. Young, arrives, sort of drives up in a van. And it's essentially like, oh, you're out here past your bedtime. I don't know what you've been up to, but you better come home. I wanted to ask you, like, do you think here that, because that's his real father, right? And Satan is his satanic, otherworldly father, and he stops that one from coming, and instead his real father arrives. Is that something he orchestrated? Because we do get a scene earlier where I think it's that same busybody character tells on him and tells his father that... what's going on, and sends the father after him, right? So is it just a coincidence, or is it a summoning?
Yeah, so I definitely think it was orchestrated by Adam. Although I think that the busybody did go tell his father, his Young, Mr. Young, his father, Young, that he, is out past his bedtime. I think this is like, we're seeing it before the actual action takes place, but we've seen Adam change reality multiple times. And I think in this moment, it's like him choosing humanity. So it's like his actual father, Satan, is coming out of the ground, and he changes reality in order to like still be reprimanded, because it's like, it's part of the human experience, I think, is to grow up as a kid and have your parents mad at you, something like that. Like Satan was coming because he was mad, and he felt like it was like a time for him to be a kid and be reprimanded for whatever reason. So I think that like maybe him changing reality here is also changing the reality. Like we're just seeing the reality changed previously, because we've seen it before that like whenever he changes reality, it gives this whole backstory and this whole lore, and it makes everything make sense up to that point. So like Atlantis had always been, it wasn't like it just popped up and it was there newly. It was like people had been there forever, and the Atlantis had always been there before it rises up.
Yeah, because he can literally change reality. Yeah, you're right. Actually, I like that. Whether or not, what does it mean that he was coming there already? I don't know, but I do like the idea of that has a nice sort of thematic neatness to it that I do enjoy. So I'm with you there. So after this is now the like true end. They've averted the apocalypse for now. And Crowley and Aziraphale are left after everybody else leaves, and they're sharing this bottle of wine together and talking about what happened. And I think it's Crowley is talking about how, like, so if he's got this ineffable plan, he wouldn't have created like these agents of chaos, and then like battled against them. Like he says, instead of a game of chess, this has got to be a game of solitaire. And I actually really like that. Like, he created these agents, and he's just kind of letting it play out and seeing what happens. But he actually is in control of it. So all of this, and the two armies, and everything that's been happening with the apocalypse is all perhaps part of his greater plan, if that's true, right? And they're both openly wondering about it.
That's what I was going to say. Is I don't think he's saying that. That's his side of the story for sure. But I don't know. Yeah. I don't think the book is actively saying like that is the version of what we're trying to say here.
So they also have a conversation in the next bit at the duck pond, which kind of continues this. And there's a character who's like listening to this, and then he like helps them out by saying like ineffable. Like, I think like Aziraphale can't find the word or something, and then he says it, and then he walks away. And he's this mysterious figure, and like
it's a tall man feeding the ducks. Yeah.
Yeah. Is this God? I feel like it's.
I think so, right? I think it is. It's got to be. I mean, if it's not, I'm 99% sure that it's like, oh, this is God, like kind of just popping around doing whatever he wants. But if it's not, I guess maybe because at this point everybody's memories have been wiped, seemingly. Like. So he's like Adam's changed reality to put people in places that they were, or down paths that they were going down. Like Pulsifer and Anathema are together, and they're like getting married, and so like things have changed, things have progressed, but also at the same time things like are reverted back to the way they were. Like Aziraphale's shop is back, but instead of having all of his ancient books, he has like a bunch of books that a little boy would come up with, but they're all like very valuable. He like looked them up, and they're all very valuable. So it's like, what's the difference? But yeah, I think it's got to be God, right?
Yeah, I think so. So when we catch up with Newt and Anathema, we also see that anathema, I guess, has been very lost without having these prophecies to follow. And then this Mr. Baticum, if I'm saying that correctly, he's like a messenger, comes, and he's had this thing that's been passed along through the generations that he's supposed to deliver to her at this exact moment. Newt is actually the guy who opens the door, and he sees this all coming. He's like, oh, I know what this is going to be. So instead of him, he's like thinking about the explosion of Agnes Nutter, and so he hides in the other room, and he has the other guy, the messenger guy, open it up. He's like, yeah, you go ahead and open it for me and see what's in there. He opens it up, and he reads something, and then just runs out, like terrified. And it's because it says something about essentially Agnes Nutter knew that he was going to be the one to open it, and so it's addressed to him for opening it. And do you remember what it said that scared him so badly?
Yeah, it's basically like, fuck you for opening this letter. I know that you're having an affair, and like I'll make sure that they find out if you don't put this letter down. And what's great about it is that like there's a letter. I think it's a letter within a letter within a letter within a letter. Yeah. And so over the generations that this has been protected by this seemingly like some sort of bank company or something like that. It's like hundreds of years. There's been like multiple envelopes that are like sitting there in the box, that each envelope was addressed to another person who was so tempted by the box that they opened it and opened the envelope and read what was on it. And it was basically like something to the effect of, you're having an affair, I know something about
some
you.
Some sort of dark
secret.
Doesn't
know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really, really funny. But eventually it comes out, there's another giant manuscript here, and it's the prophecies of like what happens next leading up to potentially the next apocalypse. And, yeah, it seems like Anathema sort of decides not to read it because of the power it has, and like controls her life if she were to read it. And that's where we leave them. They seem to be happy together. Also, Shadwell and Madame Tracy hook up and are going to go live in a what was the word?
Bungalow.
A bungalow, yeah. And Shadwell suggests they name it Shangri-La. Yeah, so I guess the last thing really is this Adam stuff. So Adam has sort of fixed the world. He set everything right, and he's been grounded here, and he's with Dog, who is still his like loyal pet. And then them show up over this hedge. They like look in, and they're like asking him to come see a circus or something, and he's like, no, I can't go, you know, I'm stuck here forever. And they're like, well, what about tomorrow? And he's like, yeah, try me tomorrow. Which I thought was funny. He's like, maybe we'll forget about it by then. So then they leave, I guess, to go see the circus. But then he decides he's gonna get out, and he uses his powers to like create a hole in the hedge. And then once he goes through the hedge, he goes along, and he ends up coming upon, I think, some apple trees. He climbs up into an apple tree, and he starts stealing apples, which I think has that clear biblical symbolism, right? And he thinks to himself, like, you know, there's these apples are always so good that they're worth whatever punishment comes to you for taking them. Sort of likening, the original Adam and Eve's temptation, right? Which I think comes back to him being named Adam, and why maybe it all comes full circle here.
Yeah, the part about the future is really interesting, and it's a good little read there. I like that it's just basically talking about imagining what the future might hold, and if we wanted to...
Give us the last couple lines.
And if you want to imagine the future, imagine a boot. No, imagine a sneaker, laces trailing, kicking a pebble. Imagine a stick to poke at interesting things and throw for a dog that may or may not decide to retrieve it. Imagine a tuneless whistle pounding some luckless popular song into insensibility. Imagine a figure half angel, half devil, all human, slouching hopefully towards Tadfield forever.
Yeah, so we do know that he absolutely loves Tadfield. And to me, this is just a very human, in the endless summer and the all these like human childhood images. And yeah, it's just a future of humanity, I think, is what I'm getting from that at the end. What do you think?
Right, yeah. No, I definitely agree with you. I think that's exactly what it is. This like hopeful child looking forward to the future, and like what humanity is and why it's important, and why our free will is you know, a beautiful thing, and it's creating every day. And whether it's, you know, like he's saying, like throwing a stick for a dog and seeing what that dog will decide to do, if it will or won't pick it up. Mm-hmm. You know, it's all free will. It's all choice there. The line that I did want to talk about that has some similarities with the Bible stuff is this line here. And there never was an apple in Adam's opinion that wasn't worth the trouble you got into for eating it, which you basically talked about. Just the idea that's the impetus, that's the start of all of this, right? It's the taking the risk.
Well, and they kept coming back to saying, like, why would he have made it so tasty and so easy to get to, God being the he, if he didn't actually mean for someone to take it?
And how much less interesting life would be if he hadn't. Like, we're in a garden where everything's perfect, but perfect isn't necessarily, things that are sloppy and messy are sometimes also beautiful and worth living and seeing and going through.
Yeah, so, and maybe that's all part of his design. Like, he wanted us to take the apple, he wanted us to have sin and to have, original sin, and to have be flawed, and to have to struggle and everything else. Like, maybe this is all part of his plan. So it is kind of an interesting alternate idea, like, view of what could be sort of that Christianity and biblical view of things, but still within some of the same framework. So it's a clever twist here at the end, or I don't know if it's a twist, but clever bit of writing here at the end that makes you think, and I like that. And man, I just really enjoyed reading this novel. It was a lot of fun, and I was connected with it emotionally. I thought there was a lot of really badass moments with the Four Horsemen and some of these other demons and stuff, and all the cool powers they had. What was your takeaway from the novel as on a whole, I guess?
I was just blown away by how genuinely funny it was, and how it would seem so timely. I said that in the last episode, but it just is so. And I also said in the last episode, it's like timeless because of that, because you can put it on whatever era and whatever time period you're going through, and it's going to mean something. Just because that idea of like struggling, good versus evil, or different ideologies and opposing forces and things like that, just coming together, or what is it all for, and kind of making you think about like what it actually means to be a part of humanity, and all of these dumb things we spend our time worried about and wasting time with.
Yeah, I like that, man.
Absolutely amazing book. I'll be revisiting it again. I think I would stand by my statement. It's one of my favorites that we've ever read for the podcast. Cool. As far as new content goes.
I think I'm going to withhold. I want to wait, because that's something we do. We always do that with the Last Looks. We talk about like stuff we read this year. I also know we have our 100th episode coming up here in about 9 episodes or so from now. So I think we might do some retrospective stuff then. So maybe I'll hold it till then. But yeah, I'm gonna think about it, and I'm gonna think about like all the stuff we've read so far, and maybe think about what my top 5 books are, or something that could be fun to talk about. I don't know.
Yeah, that'll be cool. So there are a couple other things that I wanted to touch on here, and one of them being this other book that gets delivered kind of feels like it's building into a sequel, and there might be there's something there potentially. So I looked into it a little bit, and there may or may not have been plans for a sequel novel. I think they even had a title for it, but it was said that when Gaiman moved to the U.S., it just like Terry Pratchett felt that kind of like ended any chances of a sequel novel. Right. And then, obviously the tragic death of Terry would kind of stop that from happening, I would think, unless Gaiman wanted to do it on his own and they had some sort of
or something. I don't think he would ever do that. No. But then doing the series, I think is something that Neil has said he didn't know would ever happen, and the fact that it is actually happening now, I think is a testament. That goes back to that interview that I. Oh, by the way, did you listen to that interview? Did you watch that interview?
Yeah, I did.
What did you think of it?
I loved it. I mean, it made me love the guy so much more, Neil Gaiman. Like, I just feel like I know him as a person. It's incredible. I was enthralled listening to him talk about pens, like ink pens for like 20 minutes or something.
Such a classic like romantic kind of writer, like the idea that he's got these like leather bound journals that he's writing in longhand, and this inkwell pens and all this stuff. It's I love it. I mean, I'm totally not that, like, if I were to try and write a page with that kind of pen, like, it would be unusable because it'd be illegible, so it just would never happen. But it's cool. I love that there's somebody out there doing that.
I love it too. Yeah, it kind of made me want to invest or look into just getting one of these pens and using it for whatever I want to use it for. But it's just like
how's your handwriting?
I was fascinated. It's not good, but it's not like. I mean, I wouldn't want to show it to anybody, but just for myself to have fun. It's like part of this creative.
As long as you can read it. My problem is I can't read mine, so that's real bad. Yeah, I know what you mean.
And he's fascinating. Hearing him talk about Terry and Good Omens and everything was, I mean, it was heartwarming and breaking because just he had so much respect for Terry and
yeah,
I think that he really, really, really is happy that he decided to take on 3 books at once in order to work with Terry, because you can tell how much it means to him.
Yeah. Speaking of that, just real quick as an aside, after listening to that interview, I immediately bought the audiobook for the Graveyard book.
Nice.
Because I was like, this sounds amazing. Like the idea of a kid being raised in a graveyard and like learning things from the dead just sounded so cool to me. Written by Neil Gaiman. I was like, I'm so sold on this book.
So
I have to get it.
I want to read. I want to read everything he's ever written. Like I want to read everything Terry Pratchett. I'm serious. Like I will be reading.
I haven't read any Discworld novels, which is going to be shocking to people listening to this probably. But I want to. I mean, now especially after this, it's so funny. Like I'm into it. Yeah.
I'm totally on board. I love both of these people.
So we touched on it earlier that there was this last little bit where each of the 2 talk about the other in like a section. And I just thought it was really cool because it's like the idea of, and it showed the mutual respect they had for each other, and to have, Neil Gaiman talking about Terry Pratchett and how he, that was that line of him, saying that he was so much more prolific than Douglas Adams, and he's didn't like that he felt like he didn't get a lot of respect for being kind of a humorist and a satirist because people tend to think that means it's not important, which was unfair. And that really came across. And then Terry Pratchett's talking about Neil Gaiman and the clear respect he had for him, and sort of his brilliance in being able to do comics and novels and screenplays and all this stuff, right? And I just thought it was really neat to have that at the end of the book and to see the respect these 2 had for each other.
Yeah, and I mean, we're gonna see Neil Gaiman's screenwriting prowess here soon. He wrote a lot of this show, and he's the showrunner, and I think it's going to be really fascinating.
I really hope it's good.
I hope it's incredible. I would, if this lives up to the source material, it could be one of the best shows of the year. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to. I do worry that we're setting our expectations so high that it's gonna be a letdown. But I'm susceptible to hype. I get hyped for things, so. I can't help but get hyped for it, yeah.
The cast and the creative force behind it, Neil Gaiman, is like, I'm sold, and like, it's got to at least be fun. It looks like it's going to be
it's got to at least be fun. So we shall see how it goes. I do want to talk a little bit about like predictions we might have for the show, but I think that'd be cool to save them maybe for the very end.
Yeah, let's save it till the end. So this week we wanted to thank one of our patrons, Kyle B. He's been a patron for a very long time now. We appreciate that support, and if you wanted to support this podcast as well, keep it going, help us move it into the future, it's going to be patreon.com/inktofilm.
Yeah, we have lots of bonus content on there, including our 13th bonus episode we just released, which is us talking about the final season of Game of Thrones, and sort of just commiserating over some of the things that we were unhappy with. So if you were at all unhappy with the final season of Game of Thrones and you're interested in that, we'd love to have you come check it out.
Connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all of those at inktofilm. And join our Council of Inklings on Facebook, which is where we post polls and information about upcoming adaptations, and it's a pretty fun time, so go check it out.
Absolutely. And make sure to enter into that giveaway. This is going to be your last chance. You have until the end of the week, essentially. Saturday morning, I'll be announcing. Find those posts, enter to win. You can get a copy of this book.
And you can enter like 3 times. So I would recommend entering as many times as possible.
Once on Instagram, once on Twitter, once on Facebook, yeah. And another way to help the show out that doesn't cost you anything is to leave us a rating and review on iTunes or wherever else you found this podcast. That's super helpful, helps us get the word out. So please leave us one. We haven't gotten a new one in a little while, and I'm starting to feel unloved.
Thank you to Jennifer Delazana for providing our transcripts, and thank you to Music Lover for the use of our intro and outro music.
All right, man. So I just wanted to talk a little bit, make some predictions maybe, talk about some things we really want to see. Things we think they might change, anything like that, real quick here at the end.
I just think that with it being Neil Gaiman, things are going to be changed for an adaptation. Obviously, I think there's moments that the book takes its time to set up jokes, which I really enjoyed about it. I thought it was like those fun payoffs when like really funny jokes are built up over time. I think that like there may be some of that in the show. It might be a little harder to keep people engaged in a joke for that long, but I think that it's going to be a funny show. I think it's going to be fun. I think it's going to be overall just interesting. Like the cast is David Tennant, Michael Sheen.
Sheen, yeah.
And I mean, John Hamm, Nick Offerman. The cast is insane. It's absolutely like an embarrassment of riches. So okay. So as far as predictions, though, I mean, I think it's going to be very, very faithful. I mean, we've seen in the trailer. If you don't want to know what I'm about to say, tune out right now. But in the trailer, we see Crowley coming out of the burning bookstore. We see the Satan coming out of the ground. We see all kinds of...
It's a little different, unless that's Beelzebub, perhaps.
Right. We see the dog. We see... I think it's going to be very faithful. I don't know how much we're going to get of... The only thing that I don't know how much we're going to get of is like Shadwell and the witch hunting order. I think that's some of the stuff that, like, if you were going to cut something, cut it down.
I know Anathema and Newt are both in it, for sure. They're not really much in the preview, but they are in it.
I think still having them, they'll still be there. I just think that, like, reducing the amount of time that is spent on... I think it's going to be more Crowley and Aziraphale focused.
Okay, so that was going to be my prediction. I think looking at how adaptations go and what we've learned from doing this podcast, right? I think some of the scenes and some of the humor that worked really well in the book aren't going to translate as well to the screen, and they're going to know that, so they're going to change some of them. Also, some stuff that maybe hasn't aged as well. Every now and then there was a joke that it felt like a little bit off for modern sensibilities. I don't think we're going to get those. I think they're going to change those and update those. And then I think, actually, I suspect some of these storylines are going to be bigger, because I was thinking about it, and this book feels fast. It feels like we don't spend a lot of time with any one character. And I kind of think we're going to spend more time with not only Aziraphale and Crowley, but also Anathema and Newt, and I think we're going to spend more time with Adam and them. I think all of those characters are going to get more time, and because we're going to get more time, we're going to get more scenes. We're going to get some new jokes. We're going to get some new stuff. And I'm excited for that too, because that's the kind of thing that like really plays into the book readers. Because like, if you're coming to it like, I've already read this book, why do I care? It's because you're going to get more, I think. You're going to get more and different. And I think it's going to be enjoyable for that reason. I hope so. That's what I'm looking for.
I think that he will probably update things and change things for the modern audience and the people who've read the books. That's always like a fun little thing. It's just how much will they change and will people respond well to them? Yeah. Question, do you think that we see aliens?
Yes, only because I've seen it in the trailer.
Oh, really?
There was a trailer that showed the UFO coming down.
Oh, funny. Maybe I just missed that.
Yeah. Also, the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, I'm very excited to see. That's the other one. I really hope they're badasses.
All we saw in the trailer was just them on the motorcycles, right?
Yeah, not much, right? Cool. I'm excited to see more of them and their interactions with each other.
Yeah, what I'm really hoping for is some surprising faces under those helmets. You know, like how much fun can they have with the fact that like they're going to bring some surprising actors to those roles. I don't know who the Four Horsemen are played by actor wise, but I'm probably not going to look it up just so I can be surprised when they flip those visors up.
Yeah, we'll see, man. Okay, I think that's a good place to leave it. It's been a lot of fun covering this book. I'm very excited for the show. We hope you return for our coverage. We're going to be doing the first 3 episodes next week, and then we're going to be doing the final 3 episodes the following week, because they're dropping all of them at the same time coming up soon. So yeah, very excited for that. Hope you join us. But until then,
thanks for listening.